The cattleman said the land was his now. The marshal said, "Show me the deed." The first time Darcy Willard met Marshal Theo Beckett, she was standing in the middle of Iron Springs Main Street with a shotgun and an expression that suggested she knew how to use both. It was a Tuesday morning in June, and the town was watching from behind its windows with the careful attention of people who wanted to see what would happen but did not want to be seen seeing it. Darcy was 29, a widow of 7 months, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands and the lean, weathered look of a woman who had worked land rather than merely lived on it. Her husband, Emmett Willard, had died of a burst appendix on a November night, while Darcy held his hand, and the nearest doctor was 40 miles away. He had left her 200 acres of grazing land, a small house with a sound roof, 40 head of cattle, and a deed filed at the territorial office in Cheyenne. He had also, without knowing it, left her a problem named Harlan Gant. Harlan Gant ran the Rocking G, the largest cattle operation in the Iron Spring Valley. He was 53 years old, heavy through the shoulders, with a florid face and small pale eyes, and a voice that carried the assumption of obedience. He had wanted the Willard parcel for years. It held the only reliable spring in the south end of the valley, and whoever controlled the spring controlled the water for 3,000 acres of summer graze. Emmett had refused every offer. Darcy, upon inheriting, had refused them too. Gant had moved from offers to pressure. He had told the general store not to extend her credit. He had told the hired men in the valley that anyone who worked for the Willard widow would not work for the Rocking G again, which in Iron Spring was the same as saying they would not work at all. He had ridden to her property twice with his foreman and told her that a woman alone could not hold a ranch, and that she was being foolish, and that he was doing her a kindness by offering to buy. The second visit was worse than the first. Gant had brought not just his foreman, but 4 riders, and they had sat their horses in a line across her yard like a jury passing sentence. Gant had looked at the house, at the barn, at the 40 head of cattle grazing the south pasture, and he had smiled in a way that did not touch his eyes. "Winter will change your mind," he had said. "Winter always does." Darcy had told him to get off her land, both times. This morning, Gant had sent his foreman, a thick-necked man named Briscoe, with 2 riders, to move Gant's cattle onto the Willard Spring. Darcy had met them at the gate with the shotgun. "Mrs. Willard," Briscoe said, sitting his horse with the easy insolence of a man who believed the matter was already settled. "Mr. Gant says this land is his now. He says you had your chance to sell." "Mr. Gant says a great deal," Darcy said. "None of it is true. This land is mine. I have a deed. He does not. Move your cattle." "Ma'am, I have my orders. And I have a shotgun. My orders outrank yours." That was when Marshal Theo Beckett rode up. He had been in Iron Spring for 3 months, appointed by the territorial governor after the previous marshal had resigned, under circumstances that involved Harlan Gant's money and a suggestion that law enforcement in the valley would be easier without too much law. Beckett was 36, spare and quiet, with a face that gave nothing away and a reputation that had followed him from Deadwood, where he had served 4 years without firing his weapon more than twice, which in Deadwood was either a miracle or a sign that he was very good at his job. Beckett believed in the law the way some men believed in God, not as a hope, but as a structure, a framework that held the world together when everything else tried to pull it apart. He had seen what happened in towns without law, and he had seen what happened in towns where the law belonged to whoever paid the most for it. Iron Spring was the second kind when he arrived, and he intended to make it the first kind before he left. He reined up between Darcy and the riders. His horse was a dun gelding with a calm eye, and Beckett sat the saddle the way a man sits a chair he has owned for 20 years, settled, unhurried, certain of the fit. "Briscoe," he said. "Marshal, what is this?" "Mr. Gant's business." "Mr. Gant's business is standing in a public road pointing a shotgun. That makes it my business." He looked at Darcy. "Ma'am, would you lower the gun?" Darcy looked at him. She had seen the new marshal around town, but had not spoken to him. He had the kind of face that was difficult to read, which in her experience meant either that the person had nothing worth reading or that they had learned to keep the important parts hidden. "Will you make them move?" she asked. "I will sort it out, but I need you to lower the gun first." She lowered the gun. Beckett turned to Briscoe. "You have a deed to this land?" "Mr. Gant says." "I did not ask what Mr. Gant says. I asked if you have a deed." Briscoe's jaw worked. "No." "Then move the cattle off her property. Now." Briscoe looked at the marshal, then at Darcy, then at the two riders behind him, who were looking at the ground in the way men look at the ground when they know they are on the wrong side of something. "Mr. Gant will hear about this," Briscoe said. "Good," Beckett said. "Tell him I said show me the deed." The cattle were moved. Briscoe rode back to the rocking G. Darcy stood in the road with the shotgun broken over her arm and watched the marshal sit his horse, with the same unhurried patience he had shown throughout. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me yet," Beckett said. "Gant will not stop because I told his foreman to move some cows. I know. You should file a complaint with the territorial office. I have filed 2. They take 4 months to process, and Gant knows it." Beckett looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition of something. Not sympathy exactly, but the acknowledgement of a fight that was going to be harder than it should have been. "Then I will come by your ranch tomorrow," he said, "to assess the situation. The situation is that a rich man wants my land, and I will not sell it. I understand the situation, Mrs. Willard. I would like to see the land." He came the next day. He rode the perimeter of the Willard property, examined the spring, inspected the fence lines that Gant's riders had cut in 3 places, and made notes in a small leather book that he carried in his vest pocket. Darcy watched him work and said nothing. She had expected a man who would ride through, make sympathetic noises, and leave. Instead, she got a man who counted fence posts and paced distances and knelt in the dirt to examine boot prints and hoof prints where the riders had come through. He was thorough in a way that was almost aggressive, as though the details were weapons he was collecting for a fight he intended to win. He spoke to Darcy about the timeline of Gant's harassment, the refused credit, the blacklisted labor, the trespassing, and wrote it all down with the precision of a man who understood that paperwork was as important as a badge. "You have been fighting this alone," he said, standing by the spring while his horse drank. "There is no one else to fight it. There is now." Darcy looked at him. She wanted to believe him. She had wanted to believe a great many things since Emmett died. That the territorial office would act. That the neighbors would stand with her. That being right was enough to protect what was hers. None of those things had proven true. She had learned, in 7 months of widowhood, that a woman alone on the frontier occupied a particular kind of position, visible enough to be targeted, invisible enough to be ignored. The neighbors who had come to Emmett's funeral with casseroles and condolences had retreated to their own concerns within a week. The territorial office had acknowledged her complaints with form letters. The previous marshal had told her, with a shrug that cost him nothing, that property disputes were civil matters. She was not bitter about this. Bitterness required energy she could not spare. But she was tired, and the tiredness went deeper than her bones. "Marshal Beckett," she said. "The last marshal in this town took Gant's money and looked the other way. Why should I believe you are different?" "Because I do not take money," Beckett said, "and I do not look away." Over the following weeks, Beckett made himself a fixture in the valley's dispute. He rode to the rocking G and served Gant with a formal trespass notice, which Gant tore up in front of him. He filed a report with the territorial office, documenting the fence cutting and the economic intimidation, using language that was dry and precise and devastating in its specificity. He rode the Willard fence line every 3rd day and repaired the cuts he found, because he said that maintaining evidence of the boundary was as important as documenting its violation. Gant responded the way powerful men respond when they encounter an obstacle they cannot buy or intimidate. He went to the territorial governor and demanded Beckett's removal. The governor, who owed Gant favors but owed the law more, declined. Gant then offered to buy the Willard parcel at 3 times its value, which was his way of saying that he expected the price to make the problem go away. Darcy refused. Beckett was in her kitchen when the offer came, because he had taken to stopping by after his circuit rides to check on the fence lines and to drink the coffee that Darcy made, which he said was the best coffee in the territory, which was not true but was kind. He watched her read the offer and set it on the table. 3 times the value, she said. It is a good price. It is not about the price. It is about Emmett. He worked this land for 12 years. He built this house. He dug the well. He cleared the pasture with his own hands. Selling it to the man who tried to steal it would be the same as saying none of that mattered. Beckett nodded. He understood about things mattering. He had spent 4 years in Deadwood, upholding laws that half the town did not want upheld, because the law mattered whether people wanted it to or not. It was the same stubbornness, the same refusal to let the wrong thing win because winning was easier. Then we hold the line, he said. He said it simply, without drama, the way he said everything. But something in the way he said it, the quiet certainty, the absence of qualification, reached a place in Darcy that she had been protecting since November. She looked at this man sitting in her kitchen, drinking her coffee, treating her fight as though it were his own, and she felt the first crack in the wall she had built between herself and the possibility of relying on another person. "Why does this matter to you?" she asked. "It is not your land. It is not your fight." Beckett set down his coffee cup. "It is everyone's fight," he said. "When a man with money can take what belongs to a person without money, the law means nothing. And if the law means nothing, then I mean nothing. I am not willing to mean nothing." They held the line. Through July, when Gant's riders cut the fence again and drove 50 head onto the Willard Spring, and Beckett impounded the cattle and charged Gant with trespass. Through August, when Gant's lawyer filed a claim challenging the Willard deed on a technicality so thin it was transparent, and Beckett rode to Cheyenne himself to ensure the territorial clerk rejected it. Through the evening, when 3 of the Valley ranchers came to Darcy's porch and said quietly that they had been afraid of Gant, but that watching a woman and a marshal stand up to him had made them ashamed of their own silence. They offered to testify. They offered to ride the fence line. They offered what they should have offered months ago, and Darcy accepted it with grace, because she understood that courage is sometimes contagious and sometimes slow, and that late was better than never. Through the long, hot summer, when the work of defending a 200-acre parcel against a man with 3,000 acres and no conscience became the central fact of both their lives. Would Darcy notice things about the marshal? She noticed that he ate supper alone at the boarding house every night, and that his room above the jail had no curtains, and that his clothes were mended by his own hand, in stitches that were functional but not pretty. She noticed that he brought her small things when he came: a bag of sugar from the store, a newspaper from Cheyenne, a packet of seeds he had found at the dry goods that he said looked like the kind of thing a garden might want. He never presented these things as gifts. He set them on the kitchen table without comment, and she accepted them without comment, and the table became a kind of ledger of accumulated kindness that neither of them acknowledged but both of them tracked. She noticed that he read law books in the evening, thick volumes he had ordered from Denver, and that he underlined passages with a pencil and made notes in the margins. She noticed that he was lonely, in the particular way that principled men are lonely, not for lack of wanting company, but because the things they would not compromise on had made company scarce. One evening in September, after Beckett had ridden the fence line and repaired a cut and filed his report and drunk his coffee, he stood on Darcy's porch and looked at the sunset and said something he had clearly been thinking about for a while. "Mrs. Willard, you can call me Darcy. You have drunk enough of my coffee to earn it. Darcy." He turned the name over like a coin. "I want you to know that my interest in this case is professional, but I also want you to know that my interest in you is not." Darcy looked at him. The sunset was behind him and his face was in shadow, but she could see his eyes, and they were steady and serious and unafraid. "I know," she said. "You know? I have known since July. You are not as difficult to read as you think." Something happened to his face then, something that might, in better light, have been a smile. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. They were married in November, 1 year after Emmett's death, by the circuit judge in the parlor of the Willard Ranch. Darcy wore Mariel's best dress, and Theo wore his cleanest shirt, and the ceremony was witnessed by 3 neighbors who had finally found the courage to stand with her once someone else had stood first. Harlan Gant did not attend. He sold the Rocking G the following spring and moved to Denver, where his money bought him comfort, but not a spring. The Willard Ranch, the Beckett Ranch now, held its water and its land and its line, and the marshal who had said, "Show me the deed," kept saying it, in one form or another, for the rest of his life.